Hi, my name is Amanda Glass, and I'm presenting my instructional design project for EDU 643. Like I said, my name is Amanda, and I teach fourth grade at Rockford Public Schools. This is my fourth year teaching, and I've taught fourth grade each of those years. This project, I'm focusing on mathematics, specifically angles. It's a pretty big concept for fourth graders. And I have my undergrad from CMU as well, with a major in math and minor in language arts. So to start off my project, I used our beginning and end of the year discovery education data. Discovery education is what our 3rd through 5th grade students take for math and reading to see where our bottom percentages of students are and our higher percentages. So we basically just use it for data. So I used the end of the year from 2014 and 2015 as well as the beginning of the year for that year, and then the beginning of the year for this school year data as well. So Discovery Education splits the data up into different subgroups, and I noticed that the highest percentages of low scores were found in the measurement and data and geometry subgroups for each of those time periods I was looking at. So specifically, there's a correlation between those two groups with the category of angles, and I looked at some of the angle questions that many of our students got wrong, and I realized they really needed more support with angles. So some of those questions that I looked at, including the points, lines, angles concept, the measuring of angles, and then also adding and subtracting of angles. So I figured if they can have a stronger basis and more comfort with angles, then they can get into further concepts like adding and subtracting angles. So to start my design, I focused on my goal statement, which was 90% of students will successfully demonstrate accurate measuring of angles within 2 degrees of accuracy using a protractor. And I focused on kind of the skills they would be able to need in order to be able to successfully use that protractor. And I know that they would need to know how angles are formed, identify them, because identifying them is a big piece when we're measuring them, and then how to use the protractor and how to use it to also identify those angles. These are the Common Core state standards for fourth grade that go along with those objectives that I shared previously. So measuring angles, and also that second one, how it's focusing on drawing angles, but focusing also on the right, acute, and obtuse terms there. And then also recognizing how angles are formed and understanding what that angle measurement means. So I decided to present my instructional website using the website Wix. I also have my classroom website using Wix, so I'm familiar with it, and I like the way that you can build your website on it. In the future, I do want to try out some of these other cool sites that I've seen classmates using, and just see what they have to offer. At my school, we use a learning management system called Schoology, so I wanted to use that, but because it is just for my classroom in my school, I couldn't give access to the class and to you because you would need the passwords and things. So I decided to stick with Wix, and then I could just embed that into my Schoology classroom. So I thought about how I wanted to assess and check in along the way with my students, because it is a lot of concepts that I'm covering. So I wanted to check in along the way, as well as pre-assess and post-assess. So I wondered what resources I would use. I've learned about a lot of them in this course just through sharing the last few weeks. But I decided to stick with ones that my students were familiar with currently, and that is 10 Marks and Schoology. So both of those are my students have accounts in, and so they're familiar with both of those. In my initial plan, I also plan to use discovery education assessments, smaller ones, not the beginning and end of year ones, but to create smaller ones, and I decided just to limit it down to those two. So when I was developing my website, I decided to shorten my objectives, and I took out part of my parts that my lessons didn't completely cover. So the objectives that I had in there that my lessons weren't really focused on. I focused on the objectives and the understanding for these within each of my tabs on my website, which you'll see when I get into that. And I thought about using the tabs to decide my math groups, because as you'll see in my activity, I do a math workshop. So I created this resource to be used by students independently during my math workshop. When I'm working with other groups, they would be independently completing these tasks. And so I was going to do it by math group, and then I decided to do it as concepts instead for use so that other classes could use it when they don't necessarily use my workshop model. And then I have a group activity tab, which is part of my math workshop, which I can show you when I show the website. So I was also initially going to just link my assessments for 10 marks, which you'll see. Then I decided to embed the website for them so they didn't have to go to a different page. I tried to record my voice, and I didn't find luck uploading and changing the file type with the resource I was using, but in the future I would love to record for each page so that my students who might not be as strong of readers or who just need that other information presentation, then they can just listen to what they need to do instead. And most of my time was finding appropriate videos and activities for the students to complete, and then I go back and forth on finding educational games that I find beneficial, not just ones that are taking up their time. So like I said, I'm using the math workshop time. So during my math workshop, my students rotate between three stations. One is working with me, one is independent work, and one is group work. So this website will be not including with the teacher, because that is not independent practice for them, but the independent work, this website will include for that. And then this resource also includes what they will be doing with their group in that time. So without the teacher involved, how I looked at it. I will use a pre-assessment and a post-assessment to find students' knowledge of angles and then how this will help them grow. And I will use this website to help guide my instruction and my differentiation to see what my students need. I can also send this resource home for extra practice for my students who didn't quite get enough time to master the skills at school. They can have these resources at home to go over. And then I'm happy to share it with my other 4th grade teachers. And it doesn't have to be used the same way. They can just use it for the resources that I have. And that's why I created it this way instead of in a more specific group format. All right, so here is my website. So there's a little description here for my 4th graders to read. This would be part that I would want to record my voice for because it is quite lengthy. I have my math workshop order, so my students know which group they're in and which order they should need to go in. And when I say rotate, they know the expectations of moving on to the next rotation. So with their individual work on their own, they would be working on these 3 lessons. And then if they're in the group work rotation, they would be working on the group work tab. And then with me, they would not be using this resource. So there's a pre-test I have here. And before they start, they'll take the pre-test. And then when they finish, they'll take that same thing as a post-test. So I can show you that here, a little bit of what it looks like. It just says this is, I will read it to you, but it asks them questions about different angles, explaining how to use a protractor, actually visualizing it, seeing what they know already coming into it. So that would be what my pre and post test would be. And then that is found in Schoology. So my students know their Schoology login and they would go into it through that. I built my lessons to be, this would be their independent work time. So I set my standards here for what I expect during independent work time. And then I included a little intro about what they're going to be learning about in that lesson. And then a video, some activities to practice, an assessment to test out their skills. So 10 marks is another resource I used, and this one focuses on the line segments, rays, and angles. And then if they finish early, what they can work on. So I chose, for example, this practice activity because I knew that it wasn't just a game, but it would give them some more learning and explanation along the way, so they can be reading and checking out some more info and have it demoed for them. Each of my pages is set up the same way, so now the next lesson would be classifying angles, and they can go through this slide here to see different images of angle types. They have some instructions for what they're doing, and then again it's set up the same way. So a video, their practice activities, testing out their skills, and then if they finish early. Finally, lesson 3 would be using a protractor, and again I kept it the same at the top what my expectations are. This would be the description of using a protractor and the instructions. I included 2 videos and another visual here because using a protractor is the main focus that I'm focusing on. And then again, the practice, testing out the skills, and I will show you this 10 marks quiz. I love how it shows the protractor virtually, and they can see it on there and see the red lines clearly and answer the questions based on that, which displays the angle of 135 degrees, so they can see all of that. Finally, I have my group work tab. So during their group work rotation, they have different activities that they would be working on. One is a Jeopardy game. One is creating some virtual angles with a partner. And then here's a project where they'll be creating on paper instead. And I've included a rubric for that as well. I include my standards and objectives, what the students will be able to do, and then as well as my resources. Then the students would have to go back and take the post-test. So these were my evaluation results for people whom I evaluated. Over here you can see the comments that I received. And these will definitely help me as I look forward into what I would change about this site. So for example, my learning map changed because I cut out pieces that my lesson didn't cover. One of my colleagues suggested that I put the objectives for the students on each page, and I thought that I could do this in the form of purpose statements or I can statements. And some of my colleagues thought the format was a bit confusing because they don't do Math Workshop the same way as I do. So I could possibly change that for being able to share it with other people. I would try to add voice recording, and I would try to simplify each page, reduce the text. I'm like a simple person, so I would want to reduce it. I would add more differentiated concepts and add purpose statements to each page. So that is my presentation for you today. Thank you very much.